Histamine intolerance is one of the most misunderstood, poorly treated chronic illness issues out there. Most commonly, it is oversimplified as simply an issue that can be resolved through diet control, specifically with the low histamine diet. Unfortunately, the low histamine diet does not heal histamine intolerance at all, but merely masks and band aids the issue through symptom management. Now, can a low histamine diet reduce histamine symptoms and make your life a little bit more tolerable in the short run? Yes. But can you ever get off of the low histamine diet through diet alone? No. The low histamine diet cannot heal your sensitivity to histamine, which is actually a real possibility for you. It merely enslaves you to controlling your histamine intolerance through a very annoying diet. That's why on today's episode, I'm diving into how to actually heal from histamine intolerance so you can eat high histamine foods again and have no histamine symptoms throughout your entire day. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking through the A's to Z's of histamine intolerance, including what histamine actually is, symptoms of histamine intolerance, and my histamine intolerance treatment to naturally and completely heal you from your histamine sensitivity so you can eat high histamine foods again and have no histamine symptoms ever. If you're ready to determine if histamine is ruling your life or you're ready to end the cycle of slavery to histamine, then this episode is for you. Hey friend, welcome to the Better Belly Podcast. If you're currently trying endless supplements, doctor visits, and diet changes to heal your mystery symptoms, you are in the right place. We're here to solve the real root causes behind your gut, hormones, skin, sleep, and brain concerns, literally anything and everything in your body. My name is Allison Jordan. I'm a functional medicine practitioner that has supported over 150 clients just like you to heal problems that no one has been able to fix. You don't need a perfect diet or a random supplement you found on Instagram to heal. You need a proven system that heals your whole body from the inside out. That's what I'm here to share with you, episode by episode. It's time to make health easy again. And just as a reminder, this information is not meant to diagnose, manage, or treat disease. Always consult with your own health practitioner before you make any changes to your health. Okay, guys, I have been so excited for this episode for a while now because while histamine is not something that every single client of ours deals with, it is common enough and such a poorly misunderstood concept that I've just been itching to get this episode out to just hand out like candy to people. So let's jump in and just get going. I want to first start off this whole conversation on talking about what histamine even is, because I feel that a lot of times when I've talked to clients about histamine intolerance, they've heard the word thrown around. They might even think that they have it, but they don't fully understand the role of histamine and the fact that it actually has natural, healthy roles in the body. So let's just start off. Histamine is a compound in the body produced by an amino acid called histidine. That might just sound super nerdy, but it is a part of your immune response called your mast cells. And your mast cells is a part of your immune system that is designed to help your white blood cells know where to go and attack and deal with things. And it can help create all sorts of physiological responses that, let's say, if you actually had an infection or a pathogen or some type of dirty microbe that your body is trying to get rid of, it is super effective for that. But not only is histamine does it play a role in our immune system? And again, most people are going to think of histamine maybe with taking an antihistamine, which common products that we're going to think of on the market for this are things like Claritin or Flonase, I think, has histamine in it. I didn't even look through all this. There's a lot of antihistamine products that have to do with helping your sinuses. So saying, I have spring allergies, so I'm taking Claritin, I'm taking Allegra. These all have histamine blockers in it. And what it does, it doesn't help you break down the histamine or reduce it in the body. It just makes your cells numb to that histamine. And interestingly enough, if you're one of the unlucky ones, then as you block the histamine, if you don't break down histamine very well, which is usually the root cause of a histamine intolerance, the histamine is going to continue to build in your body, build, because you're not dealing with it. So histamine blockers can actually be a part of developing a histamine intolerance. Just one piece of the puzzle, but it can be a part of it. So again, histamine, it can create congestion, mucosal secretion. It's what you're thinking of with allergies. The other big one is going to be a skin response. When people say, I'm having an allergic reaction, I have a rash, I have hives, I have some type of inflammation on my skin, that can be another thing. Those are the two most common things that you might be familiar with. But here's some things you might not be familiar with that literally everyone listening to this podcast, whether or not you have a histamine intolerance, and I'm going to get to even that phrase and what it means and things like that, but we all have histamine being released on a daily basis that does phenomenal things for us if it's functioning normally. So histamine is actually part of our circadian rhythms, meaning it's a part of helping us fall asleep and wake up and feel alert. It is a part of our digestion. It helps modulate our GI motility. It's one of the reasons that actually one of the symptoms of histamine intolerance or high histamine in the body is diarrhea, because having excessively high histamine levels can cause too much GI motility, meaning stuff's moving through faster than it should. Histamine helps us in digestion by enhancing stomach acid production, which is why high histamine levels can actually be a cause of acid reflux and needs to be considered as a potential one of the layers that you want to deal with at the root cause level when someone has acid reflux. And digestion also helps in digestion by altering mucosal secretion. And you actually see mucosal secretion in the sinuses as well. So when you think that congestion that people can get because of a histamine response due to allergies through, like, again, spring, fall, whatever allergies you have, that is because you're getting mucosal secretion, where you need that in a healthy, good way in your digestive tract, and histamine is responsible for that. Histamine is a part of your immune system, which protects us against foreign invaders, and it's a part of our stress response, which particularly it helps us feel alert. So similar to the sleep-wake cycle, histamine is both helps us be alert, or to wake up, but it also helps us specifically to be alert. It acts like a neurotransmitter in our brain, which is so cool and crazy. Thinking it's in our sinuses, it's in our gut, it's in our brain. It has all these roles that makes us function well. And when we don't have too much of it, we have no idea it's working in the background because it's not building up to these really, really high levels. So what is histamine intolerance? And before I get there, I'll say another phrase you might hear on the internet or online is histamine sensitivity. The terms are interchangeable. They don't really mean anything different. They're not actually a diagnosis. They're a description of how basically, typically, you have too much histamine in your body. And if you imagine a bowl of water, or even not a bowl, but like a funnel that is funneling water through it, as the funnel is getting water poured into it, that would be the histamine, and the funnel has no issues with water being poured through it as long as the water is being poured at a regular rate and the funnel gets no clogs. But if the funnel starts to overflow, that's when you have a histamine intolerance. That means you now, with very, very slight amounts of increase of histamine, you suddenly get histamine responses and symptoms, high histamine symptoms in your body. And it might not be the traditional sense of histamine. I already gave the examples of skin issues and sinus issues. Well, you could actually have high histamine, a histamine intolerance, and be getting symptoms of histamine with no sinus symptoms and no skin issues, which is one reason that histamine intolerance flies under the radar of conventional medicine, because if it's not sinus and it's not skin, they're often not thinking about histamine as a potential component of what you're going through. If they do think of histamine, they're only going to throw medications at you that are histamine blockers. They'll never ask the deeper question of, why do you specifically have so much histamine in your body? Your body doesn't just create histamine for no reason. There is a reason. So the root cause, or the functional medicine approach, would say, let's do deeper testing to find out what your body is so upset about that it's releasing gobs and gobs of histamine. The other issue with histamine intolerance might be that you actually have potentially a fairly normal influx of histamine, meaning you're pouring water into this funnel and it's the same amount of water most people are getting, the same amount of histamine response. But if your funnel is getting blocked or clogged and you can't pour out water as fast as other people, that could be another reason that you're getting a histamine intolerance symptoms. And so those are going to be bigger issues of what's clogging your funnel. There are some pathogens that can inhibit histamine metabolization. There are nutrient deficiencies that can inhibit histamine metabolization, and there can be some genetic predispositions that are not overcomable. Let's say that are overcomable. It's not like, oh, you have some genetic SNP, screw it, you're always going to have histamine issues. By no means. I have lots of clients with SNPs that impact their histamine digestion, and they are able to overcome it without needing to be on some annoying low histamine diet the rest of their life. By no means is this not overcomable, but you want to be asking the questions, how do we find those things? And that's where deeper lab testing goes on that you are not going to get in a hospital system. And unfortunately, if you're working with a functional practitioner, an integrative practitioner, holistic, whatever term they use, if they are not wildly and deeply familiar with potential root causes of histamine excess or basically poor histamine metabolization, meaning your body can't get rid of it. If they're not wildly familiar with the root causes of that, they'll still not do the right testing to figure out the issue with the histamine. So the histamine intolerance, it's not a food sensitivity, it's not permanent, and it's not normal. It's totally fixable for anybody, even if there's genetic SNPs involved. And what histamine tolerance is simply a state where you have more histamine in your body than your body can deal with. And maybe that's just because maybe you're metabolizing it at a normal rate, but you have just so many sources of histamine, it is overwhelming your body. Or maybe it's a slightly elevated number of histamine sources, but you're also clogged at the same time. It can be a combination of factors. And so at the end of the day, there is no one histamine protocol that can heal anyone. Even if you're thinking in terms of like supplements or diet or root causes or labs, I have had dozens of histamine sensitive clients, meaning they have too much histamine, and every single case has a different combination of factors involved. Now, 5 cases might all have one of their 5 factors is the same, but the combination is always different. So you really want to do these really broad spectrum testing, and I'm going to get into this in a second of, the testing I recommend. But at the end of the day, the testing that we recommend is driven by understanding what are the root causes of histamine intolerances at a specific level. So now that we understand the general concept of histamine intolerance not being a food sensitivity, not being an allergy, it's about your body having too much exposure to histamine, potentially, often likely, usually that's a component of it, and then also potentially an issue with not being able to drain it and get it, metabolize it, break it down in the body fast enough. So let's talk about symptoms. If you're like, Allison, if there are symptoms of histamine intolerance that aren't just sinuses and skin, like congestion or hives or rashes, what else? What other symptoms in the body should I be looking for? Well, here's a couple. Digestive problems. That can be abdominal pain, bloating, cramping, diarrhea, constipation. Coincidentally, I know that doesn't make full sense, but both diarrhea and constipation, heartburn, reflux, and nausea. And by reflux, I mean acid reflux. Nausea is a really interesting one here. I have tons of clients who've got this chronic nausea that they can't get rid of. It's like in the pit of their stomach, and nobody knows what to do with it, and it's driving them mad. It feels like they're pregnant all the time if they're female and they've been pregnant. Interestingly enough, a lot of these women who already have nausea issues when they're not pregnant, they are my clients who also say, well, when I was pregnant with my 2 children or however many children they ended up having, Because a lot of times these women are finding me in their 40s and 50s, unfortunately. They'll say, when I was pregnant with these children, I just had the worst nausea ever. And that's because they already had high histamine levels. And actually, pregnancy can increase your histamine levels, which is actually a normal, healthy function. But if you already just are too much, if you're already histamine overloaded, being pregnant is not going to help you with your nausea specifically. So, nausea, even when you're pregnant, can actually be a sign that you're tipping the scales of too much histamine and not enough histamine metabolization. Which, interestingly enough, you can actually reduce nausea in pregnancy by starting to think about what breaks down histamine and how to reduce histamine exposure. So those are digestive symptoms. You can also get headaches and migraines from high histamine issues because histamine is a vasodilator, meaning it expands your blood vessels. And when you have a widening of blood vessel, this puts a lot of pressure on the meninges inside the brain, and that will create that headache or migraine. You can have skin issues, think rashes, spots, hives, flushing, sweating, feeling like your skin's on fire, eczema, rosacea, etc. You can have itching, think you're itching of the skin, eyes, ears, nose, conjunctivitis, meaning that irritated, watery, reddened eyes. Basically whatever the irritant is that is being exposed in the eyes and the histamine is being released in the eyes, they get bloodshot because you're getting that vasodilation around the eyes, and then you're watering, and your body's trying to flush out the issue that the histamine the thing that's causing the histamine response in the eyes. You can have tissue swelling, often in the face and throat. That's more of like when someone's saying I'm having an allergic response and I can't breathe. That's where things can get ugly. But you can also have that kind of low grade swelling in the face and the neck and shoulders because of histamine. Numbness and tingling, fatigue, shortness of breath because of histamine's role in breathing and in lung tissue, sunlight sensitivity because of how histamine's role in the sleep-wake cycle. Part of that has to do with our sensitivity to sunlight and being responsive to sunlight. If there's too much histamine, we're overly responsive to sunlight. Bone, joint, and chest pain, drops in blood pressure because histamine is a vasodilator, which can cause the headaches, but it can also cause blood pressure to drop, tachycardia, heart racing, anxiety, and panic attacks. This is interesting because it gets back to the fact that inside the brain, histamine acts as a neurotransmitter, and it can impact the activity of other neurotransmitters in the brain, like that do mood regulation, like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. So if histamine is introduced into the situation, now your dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine might not be able to be as balanced as they were. That can cause anxiety. And the other big thing with high histamine causing anxiety or panic attacks is that histamine can cause physical symptoms that feel like anxiety. So flushing, rapid heart rate, dizziness, these can all feel like an anxiety response, but actually be histamine. So sometimes it's simply misinterpreting the symptoms we're getting as that's anxiety, where actually it's like, that's histamine. So another way and reason that that histamine issues can fly under the radar for so many people. But usually when you start listening to this list, if you have histamine symptoms, you might not have every symptom. But you're going to, I've never really found a client who has every symptom. Like I have a lot of clients who'll get the anxiety, but not headaches. They'll have PMS issues because histamine has a role in estrogen. It's proestrogenic, meaning you're going to have elevated estrogen levels if you have histamine. And if you have elevated estrogen levels, interestingly enough, that's actually one of the root causes that will also cause histamine release. So it's kind of like a catch-22 where you have this circular input of more histamine makes more estrogen, makes more histamine. You really need to break that cycle so you can metabolize estrogen and metabolize histamine, and then you stop that cycle. But yeah, really horrible periods are commonly, there can be a component of histamine involved. So they'll have really bad periods and bad anxiety, but no headaches and migraines. So it's like, you don't need all these symptoms, but if you think about them in groupings, you'll be like, oh, I actually might have histamine as one of my drivers for symptoms. It's not a root cause though, right? Histamine is reacting to a root cause and then creating its own issues. Yay. Um, So some other last few symptoms: vision problems and eye pain, often because of blood pressure issues, the vasodilation, increase in blood pressure around the eyes, eye sockets, and then changing the pressure inside the eye, which can be the vision problems, hearing problems and tinnitus, meaning ringing in the ears, dizziness, loss of consciousness because of the blood pressure issue, reactions to odors, chemicals, insect stings, and anesthesia. This is really big. This happens with kids a lot. I don't know why not adults. I feel like I get way more parents telling me my kid gets bit by a mosquito and their arm swells up. Whether it's you as an adult version or your child, big sign that there's a histamine, there's a chronic low level histamine issue in that child. Again, always go back to why. Where's the actual root cause? Because the issue is not the mosquito. No one wants to be bit by a mosquito. I hate I hate being bit by mosquitoes, and they love me, so I really hate it. But the bigger issue is that this kid is walking around with basically about that funnel that should be funneling histamine out. They're basically always walking around with it barely draining well enough. And so there's other sources of histamine that's constantly being dumped into this kid. And the question is, what is it? Because it's not food. Everyone should be able to eat high histamine foods and not have issues because we have natural systems in our body to break down histamine. All right. But reaction to odors and chemicals, because odors and chemicals, even natural odors. So, I have clients who are like, I can't smell lavender, like literally the plant, or like an essential oil, an unadulterated essential oil, or maybe it's not lavender, it's eucalyptus, whatever. And they'll get a reaction just because chemical odors, they're real chemicals and the body has to do something with it when we get exposed to it. But usually the worst reactions are going to be chemical odors. So lotions with chemicals in it, perfumes, colognes, candles. That's, you walk past Bed Bath & Beyond and you have a headache, could be a histamine issue going on. And then attention and memory problems because of histamine's role in focus. But again, too much histamine can cause a lot of essentially chitteriness and not getting that optimal alertness. You're overly alert. And so you have attention and memory problems. Potentially actually even ADHD-esque stuff. Of when you say attention, if a little bit of histamine is supposed to make you alert, a lot of histamine is going to make you bananas potentially. And that can kind of look like ADHD. Okay, so those are your symptoms. Feeling good, guys? We talked a little bit about diet. Diet is not enough because it's a Band-Aid. It doesn't solve the actual problem of metabolizing histamine and or the metabolism load. It is potentially adding to your metabolism load, but a normal functioning human body can eat high histamine foods because its systems for breaking down histamine are fully online and they're not getting additional sources of histamine. So histamine foods aren't the problem, though they can be a useful modulating tool. So let's say you say to yourself, okay, I really think I have a histamine issue. When I go on a low histamine diet, my symptoms improve. It is a good way to, until you find the real root causes to your histamine overload, a low histamine diet is a great way to shortly and in the short term get relief from symptoms. I'm very pro symptom relief. I want you to be as functional as possible and not itching your body and having a headache and horrible PMS. But it's a really unsustainable, annoying diet. I've only had a handful of clients do it for very short periods of time just to reduce their histamine load. And by the time we deal with the root cause, they can get off of it. Here's the actual factors involved. This is what you guys want to know. This is where you get a natural treatment to high histamine or histamine intolerance that will work so that you don't have to keep going back to this high histamine diet or getting histamine symptoms. Here's the actual factors you need to be thinking about, testing for, etc. I'm not getting into the testing right now, but I will in just a sec. So having low levels of healthy bacteria is going to set you up for a congested funnel, meaning we actually have bacteria in our gut they're healthy. They're part of our normal normal bacterial colonies that actually metabolize histamine for us. So if you've been placed on antibiotics once, twice, several times, once a year, let's say you get a UTI once a year and you get placed on an antibiotic, or you get bronchitis once a year and you get placed on an antibiotic. Or like I had a client come to me recently, she had H. pylori and they had to do like 4 or 5 rounds of antibiotics with her to get rid of it, which was super unfortunate. Well, now she's got all these other symptoms, and I told her that a bunch of her symptoms look like histamine issues. Well, she was put on a bunch of antibiotics, which might have depleted her bacterial colony that is supposed to help her metabolize histamine. There is no way to replenish these bacterial colonies but through just a probiotic. Like, actually, probiotics very commonly cause more histamine release. And this has to do with a whole other bunch of factors. I usually recommend people with histamine issues to not take probiotics and not eat fermented foods. It's just usually makes their symptoms go crazy, especially because fermented foods are actually in the high histamine food category, which I'm not getting a ton into in this episode, because this episode's not about using a diet. And you can, if you want to go Google high histamine foods, you will find a list. You don't need this episode. This episode's to address what no one's addressing, which is how to address this. Now, the big question is, why do you have low healthy bacteria? Usually, other than antibiotics, it's also because you have other pathogens present. They are disabling you from having healthy colonies. It's like when you have some mob boss ruling a city, the citizens will cower in fear or they'll go bananas. And so that's basically what happens is you have these other pathogens. It could be H. pylori, it could be candida, it could be mold. Mold can be a big one. If you want to know more about these pathogens, I have a 7 pathogen series on the podcast. The episodes, like I have my candida episode for that is 234, and it's going to be in the podcast show notes. And that candida episode, I think it's like the episode right before it, or maybe 2 episodes right before it, it starts with H. pylori, and then it goes to either candida, and then there's a parasite one, there's a C. diff one. Listen to all 7 of those, and you will know all the pathogens that could be and are causing histamine intolerance in my clients and potentially in you. So the pathogens can lower your healthy gut bacteria. They also will create an immune response, which will create their own levels of histamine. And then there's specific pathogens like candida that has toxins that actually triggers even more histamine response than just your average pathogen. And candida has a toxin that can block one of your body's natural abilities to break down histamine. You're like, that sucks. That's like a double whammy. Yeah, it does suck. So candida can block an enzyme called DAO. Well, that's its like acronym, DAO, diamine oxidase. It blocks that enzyme, which it's a enzyme that hangs out only in the gut. It's created by the gut for the gut. And DAO is designed to break down histamine in the gut. Histamine from foods, pathogens, etc. Because the body kind of knows that you're going to have an excessive amount of histamine exposure in the gut due to foods we're eating and the potential realities of pathogens in the food. And so it's designed to quickly deal with histamine right there on site. And it does it through this enzyme DAO. Interestingly enough, you can take DAO as a supplement, and that can be another effective way to help reduce your histamine symptoms. But I find it's a mixed bag in how effective it is, because histamine doesn't just hang out in the gut, it also hangs out in the entire body. And so DAO, if it as a supplement isn't helping your symptoms completely or a ton, it's because there's histamine elsewhere in your body other than the gut, and that's normal, right? We just talked about histamine can be in the brain, it can be in your muscles, it can be everywhere. So if you want to learn more about candida specifically and the fact that candida cannot be healed, it cannot be healed by just killing it with herbs or even an antibiotic. I don't care what you're using, antifungal. Candida is only present because of other root causes. If you want to learn about what those are so you can figure out how to actually heal your Candida, go to episode 234, super powerful episode, and it is linked in the show notes. So another thing that is a root cause of histamine issues is leaky gut. Now, leaky gut is actually still not a root cause, so sorry, I'm a little misleading there, because things damage the gut. You don't just get leaky gut for no reason. There's something damaging it. So we are back to a little bit pathogens. We're back to food sensitivities, which we haven't gotten to yet. But leaky gut is something's damaging it. But once you have leaky gut, now you're in a double whammy situation where the intestinal damage is now leading to a greater absorption of proteins from the gut into the bloodstream. It could even be like literally not even proteins that are like bad, like a bacteria or something. We're literally thinking of undigested food proteins. These proteins in the bloodstream can cause an even greater histamine level release than you would normally get if you didn't have a intestinal damage lining or damaged intestinal lining. The next issue with leaky gut is that your DAO production, which is that enzyme that breaks down histamine in the gut, literally happens in the gut lining. So if you're getting damage to the gut lining, you're getting less production of DAO, where you're now not breaking down histamine even in the gut. So it's just a double whammy that things are getting into the bloodstream that shouldn't be. So there's a histamine response, and you're not breaking down the histamine that you're naturally getting exposed to in the gut because there's damage. So again, this is not saying you can't heal. Once it's damaged, you can't get it back. But leaky gut is not something you solve by just taking L-glutamine and which is commonly known for helping rebuild the gut lining. Because if you're rebuilding the gut lining, you're doing stuff to rebuild it. It's like putting one brick down to rebuild a castle wall, while you're literally getting a trebuchet of rocks thrown at your wall that's tearing 1,000 bricks down. You have to stop whatever's attacking your gut lining, and that's where people are failing. They're in conventional medicine. They're definitely not looking very effectively at what's breaking down your gut lining. The tests are you're not even getting the right tests, or the tests themselves are very weak. And then even with functional medicine practitioners, they're over celebrating, saying they found something. We found Candida, we found H. pylori, we found a heavy metal. They find one thing and they tell you that's your one issue. It's never an issue of one issue. It's never one issue. By the time you are this sick, your gut is designed to re-heal itself. It actually heals at an incredibly fast rate. It knows it's going to lose cells in the gut lining. If one issue is often not enough to create this process that the gut cannot heal fast enough to overcome the breaking down of the gut lining. It's 2 issues, it's 3, it's 4, it's 5, it's 10. It could be a lot. This is not to say you can't reverse it, but you really need a practitioner who's doing a lot of testing. So that's one big issue I find, is that practitioners are not doing enough testing, and they're oversimplifying what's causing your leaky gut, and then you don't heal it and you feel like your leaky gut is never healing. Because it's not, because you're still being attacked and you don't know it, but your symptoms are saying there's still an issue. So some other things that can cause high histamine: copper toxicity. Copper toxicity is something I'm talking about literally a week from the day that this episode releases. So if you're in the future, it might already be released. It's the next episode. But copper can upregulate histamine because it plays a crucial role in the maturation and function of mast cells. And remember, at the beginning of the episode, I said mast cells are the family of the part of the immune system that histamine is under. Not all mast cells are histamine, but all of histamine are mast cells. When copper levels are deficient, and here's the interesting thing: when you have copper toxicity, you can have what we call explicit copper toxicity and hidden copper toxicity. When there's hidden copper toxicity, what you have is a gob of biounavailable copper in the body that will give you both symptoms of copper deficiency and copper excess, because you do have the copper there. It is copper excess, but it's biounavailable, so you can't use it, which then makes your body go into getting symptoms of copper deficiency. So interestingly enough, when you have copper deficiency, mast cell development is disrupted, and it can actually basically with copper, you can speed up and slow down your histamine problems at the same time. And by speed up and slow down, you're speeding up how much histamine's being made, and you can slow down your general healthy mast cell functioning. Nutrient deficiencies can cause issues with breakdown of histamine. You need vitamin C, copper, and B6 for your DAO enzyme to either be built or to function, meaning you need a cofactor for the DAO enzyme to work with, which is the B6. And then there's the other enzyme that breaks down histamine in the rest of the body, so not the gut, everywhere but the gut, is HNMT. HNMT enzyme. It also has a correlating gene that makes HNMT. So you want to make sure sometimes someone's HNMT or DAO genes aren't functioning optimally. We can make them function more optimally through functional medicine. So again, it's not saying if you have these SNPs, you are doomed forever, but it is saying you need to pay special love and care to these gene SNPs. But even if you don't have these gene SNPs, if you're missing folate, B12, B6, magnesium, or something called SAMe, your HNMT won't function properly, and then you're going to have a buildup of histamine in the rest of your body. So those are just a smattering of things that can cause histamine release or poor histamine metabolization. Now you know an idea of, you'll start to do testing. Okay, I need a test for candida. I need a test for all the pathogens that could be causing histamine release. I recommend the 7 pathogens series to be going and looking at those things. It's things like H. pylori, parasites, Lyme disease, mold, leaky gut, which you need to be dealing with the origin of the issue. And honestly, I didn't get to food sensitivities. Food sensitivities, like a genuine sensitivity, because there's one thing to eat a high histamine food. That's not a sensitivity. That's just the food has a lot of histamine in it. Fermented foods have a lot of histamine in it, as an example. If you have a food sensitivity, let's say you're sensitive to wheat. You eat wheat and you will get a histamine response. That is part of being sensitive to something, is getting an immune response from eating that food. Part of the immune response does include histamine. So if you're eating foods you're actually sensitive to, and you don't know you're sensitive to it, or whatever you could be adding, that could be another layer that's going to damage the gut lining, leading to leaky gut, and it's going to give you more histamine response. So here's how you actually heal histamine. Number 1, determine the causal factors. Determine the actual causal factors for you specifically by evaluating the 5-toxin trap. What is the 5-toxin trap? I have a whole training on it because I mention it so often in this in the Better Belly podcast. I have its own unique training. It's like its own podcast that all my podcasts point to. Go to betterbellytherapies.com/training. You will learn about the 5-toxin trap. It is 5 categories of toxins that you have to deal with to find full healing. And when you have symptoms, I know you have not addressed the 5-toxin trap. Here's the interesting thing. The number 1 reason people don't heal the 5-toxin trap is they actually think they've already dealt with all 5 categories. And that is simply not true. So again, the categories, just as a hint, it is going to include pathogens. Pathogens is one of the 5-toxin trap. Nutrient deficiencies is another. You can go learn the rest of the 3 by going to betterbellytherapies.com/training or clicking the link in the show notes and learning more about that. So like I said earlier, every histamine intolerant person has a unique set of problems. Your 5-toxin trap, the combination of the 5 toxins is going to be different than somebody else who has histamine intolerance. So you can't do the same thing that somebody else did to heal their histamine issue, right? It just isn't possible. I can't give you a protocol. The one protocol to heal histamine intolerance, the one protocol is to do, if you want one thing to do the gut healer system, which is my framework I built and put into my program, the Better Belly Blueprint, that helps you find every toxin in your 5-toxin trap and then build a protocols and do them in order in a way that makes sense to your body so that you can get rid of all 5 toxins and start functioning normally again. Clear out pathogens, add back in your nutrient deficiencies, heal it in an order that you will get effective results and then see your results. I do talk about the Better Belly Blueprint and the gut healer system in my training on the 5-toxin trap. So just go to betterbellytherapies.com/training if you want to learn what the Better Belly Blueprint's about, how the gut healer system works, what the 5 toxin trap is, and how you can join and literally find healing in 2025, which is coming up quickly as of this release, or we might already be in by the time you're listening to this, and just find healing and have the best health of your life, or potentially in the last 10 years, 20 years, that you've had because you finally have dealt with your histamine issue and all the things that were causing your histamine issue. Now, the last question I want to address is, I always get asked this. I give this spiel to clients and then they just look at me and say, is there a benefit to doing the low histamine diet? They're still thinking about the low histamine diet, right? So yes, there is a benefit to it because the low histamine diet will reduce symptoms. That can just give you relief, right? Who doesn't want relief? What it doesn't do, you just want to know what its limitations are. If you know going into starting a low histamine diet that it can reduce your symptoms, but it won't heal you, you are in a good spot. And if you know you're going to use this diet to make your life more, or maybe like less miserable, more palatable, I don't know, more doable, and you'll use the diet at the same time as figuring out your root causes. You're doing your lab testing with a practitioner. You're doing the protocols to get rid of those 5 toxin trap issues. Then that's a great way to think of it. For most of my clients, they'll look at like a low histamine diet, or basically foods that are high histamine, and they'll pull out the ones they're eating the most of. And then they'll just have massive relief, and they might not even do the full diet. They'll just kind of take out the things that are like, I eat a ton of that. And that can sometimes make a big difference. So yeah, that is it. Like, low histamine diet has a place, but it cannot be oversold as the solution or the thing that will even heal histamine intolerance, because it can't. It's not even designed to heal it. It is designed to manage it. So that is it. I hope this is like light bulbs everywhere for you. Feel the freedom of not being tied down to histamine problems. This is not a life sentence. This is not a life sentence to histamine symptoms or a life sentence to the low histamine diet, which I think is a ridiculous diet to have to like live on for the rest of your life. I mean, if you look at the list of stuff, it's pretty gnarly. Anyways, it's just crazy. So I hope this helps. If you are ready to deal with your histamine issue, go to betterbellytherapies.com/training. I will give you the whole 5 toxin trap, gut healer system, Better Belly Blueprint framework. You'll understand why it works. And after watching that video, you just scroll below the video and you can either ask a question to me if you just have a question about your specific case, or you can join right away. There's no wait list. There's nothing you have to do. No fancy dance. No, like I said, wait lists, which can be the most annoying thing. And it's literally a fraction of the cost of most practitioners you're going to be working with. So go to betterbellytherapies.com/training, find healing, get freedom, come work with me. And even if you don't work with me, take this information you learned today to whoever you work with next and make sure that they are not ignoring your potential causes of histamine intolerance and that they are doing the testing and giving you appropriate protocols for each of those issues in the right order, which I know you might not know what order they are, but that is something you want to be thinking about. And that's why the Better Belly framework is so helpful, or the gut healer system is so helpful, because it is teaching you what that order is in the framework and the protocols right there. And you know you're getting the right kind because we have helped clients with histamine, not through histamine diet. Anyways, I'm rambling now, guys. Happy December, or whatever month it is that you are listening to this episode, and I will catch you guys next week.
Hey friend, I hope you loved this episode. If you've been a fan for a while or newly loving this podcast, can you do me a favor? Drop into Apple Podcasts and leave me a review. When you leave a review, you do so much. You help me know you're listening. You can tell me what you're loving so I know what to make more of. And you help others by boosting this podcast so other people like you can find the podcast too. I mean, it's a win-win-win, right? So if you want a way to pay it forward, just go to Apple Podcasts or click the link in my show notes and leave a rating and review. And if you want some more free stuff, just head over to my free Facebook group, betterbellytherapies.com/Facebook, and you can get access to all of my free support for you, including some Facebook group exclusive stuff like my podcast episode vault, where you can search the Better Belly podcast by topic and find exactly what you need to expedite your healing. I cannot wait to see you in there. Catch you guys next week.